the few slides. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Should we, sorry, for the introduction, should I stop share and I put them later, or I should leave them here, the slides?
Well, if you...
No, I think you should stop share because, I mean, basically we have 9:45 to 10:15 evolution of EU financial instruments, what to expect under Efsd. This is a shared presentation, so it needs to finish at 10:15. So
no, what I mean at the beginning now, because we are not introducing somebody else. Should we leave it here or?
Yeah, please close your share screen.
Okay. Yes, this is what I wanted to understand. Okay, great. That's better, so that everything is ready and that's it.
Yes, but what I'm saying is if we can coordinate, because the first session you start, then you pass to me, and I prefer to share my own screen, right?
I understand, okay. So,
and then I pass to you, right?
And I will arrive, when I will arrive in the, just a second, when there is this slide before EU for Innovation, I will close and I will give you the floor and then you, yes.
Yes, let me just open the agenda.
So if we, because we don't have any discussion in this one, so after maximum half an hour, I mean, you must have your half an hour to present, because these are very dense, these 4 slides that you have.
So I need to finish at 10:45.
Yes.
Vote, announce health break, and you continue at 11 o'clock.
Yes.
I need to watch the time.
Yes, and the time should be, if you agree, half an hour for, I mean, I will take maximum half an hour and then I leave you the other half an hour.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
And we don't have questions, so this is.
Yes, but now we are already running a bit late, so.
Yeah, should we start? Good morning. I didn't intervene in your discussions.
Okay.
So
good morning,
we see each other. We don't see the rest of the participants, as I understand, in this webinar seminar. Right now, do they, see us? I have no idea about this too. So should we start? Yeah.
Yes, please. Good morning.
Yeah, I guess.
Good morning.
Değerli katılımcılar, kurumum ve şahsım adına hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum. Başkanlığımızca yürütülen ve faydalanıcısı siz kamu kurum kuruluşlarımızın olduğu AB tarafından finanse edilen İPA 3 teknik destek projemiz kapsamında 2 yarım gün halinde gerçekleştireceğimiz Avrupa Sürdürülebilir Kalkınma Fonu Plus, yani bu eğitimler boyunca kısaltmasıyla kullanılacağımız ve büyük ihtimalle İngilizce olarak söylenecek Efsd Plus ve Türkiye Yatırım Platformu eğitim etkinliğimize hoş geldiniz. Malumunuz katılım öncesi mali yardımın 2021-27 yıllarına sahip 3. döneminde Avrupa Birliği hibe fonlarından ülkemiz yine katılıma yönelik projelerinin finansmanını sağlıyor. Bununla ilgili programlama süreçlerini Avrupa Birliği Başkanlığı olarak sizlerle birlikte yakın işbirliğinde yürütüyoruz. Avrupa Birliği yine aynı dönem için Avrupa Sürdürülebilir Kalkınma Fonu artı mekanizması çerçevesinde ortaklık içerisinde olduğu ülkelere yine bu yıllar için yaklaşık sağlayacağı 40 milyar avroluk bir garantiden faydalanabilmesi için yararlanıcı ülkelerde bir yatırım platformu kurulmasını tavsiye etti. Bu kapsamda ilgili tüzükleri NİDİCI ve İPA 3 tüzüklerini değiştirdi ve ülkemizi de böyle bir mekanizmanın içine aldığını ve bununla bağlantılı bir yatırım platformu oluşturduğunu ifade etti. Pek çoğunuzun belki bildiği gibi Avrupa Komisyonu geçtiğimiz ay kabul ettiği bir kararla, komisyon kararı ile Türkiye Yatırım Platformu'nu kabul etti ve söz konusu mekanizmanın ülkemizde ne şekilde oluşacağına, ne şekilde yer alacağına, ne şekilde işleyeceğine dair çalışmalarımızda biz bütün ilgili taraflarla halihazırda sürdürüyoruz. Özellikle konuyla bağlantısı nedeniyle Cumhurbaşkanlığımız Strateji ve Bütçe Başkanlığı ile Hazine ve Maliye Bakanlığımız ile yakın temas halinde gerek Türkiye Yatırım Platformu'nun ülkemizdeki yönetişim yapısının değerlendirilmesi, gerekse mekanizmanın kapsamına yönelik çalışmalarımız halen devam ediyor. Türkiye Yatırım Platformu mekanizmasının ülkemizdeki potansiyel faydalanıcıları olan kamu sektörü ve özel sektörün yanı sıra yine bu mekanizma kapsamında söz konusu sektörlerle işbirliği halinde proje portföyleri oluşturarak Avrupa Birliği'nin açacağı çağrılara başvuracak uluslararası finans kuruluşları ile de bir dizi toplantı gerçekleştiriyoruz. Yatırım projeleri dediğimizde artık İPA'nın 3. döneminde büyük montanlı yatırım projelerinin aslında bu garanti mekanizmasına, kredi garanti mekanizmasına ya da harmanlama mekanizmasına sunulacağı akla geliyor. Yalnız yatırım projeleri dediğimizde ilk akla gelen bunlar olmakla birlikte Türkiye Yatırım Platformu kapsamında yeşil finansman bonoları, sosyal etki yatırımları gibi pek çok yenilikçi yatırım seçenekleri de olabilecek. Ülkemizin uzun yıllardır uluslararası finans kuruluşlarıyla süregelen çalışmalarının ve bu proje uygulama tecrübelerinin hem kamu sektöründe hem de özel sektörde yapılacak yeni çalışmalara da çok önemli katkılar sunacağını düşünüyoruz. Ülkemizin yine AB ile ortak öncelikleri olan yeşil gündem, yeşil dönüşüm, sürdürülebilir üretim, tüketim, döngüsel ekonomi, enerji verimliliği gibi alanlarda yapacağı yatırımların yanı sıra uluslararası yükümlülüklerine de uyum çalışmaları kapsamında uluslararası finans kuruluşlarıyla yürüteceği projeler yüksek önemi haiz olacaktır. Efsd Plus ve Türkiye Yatırım Platformu mekanizmalarının pek çok farklı süreç ve teknik detay içermesi nedeniyle ülkemizdeki faydalanıcılarına bu kapsamda bir eğitim programı düzenlemesinin faydalı olacağını düşündük. Bugün ve yarın 2 yarım gün halinde düzenlenecek eğitimleri biraz önce ifade ettiğim İPA 3 teknik destek projemiz kapsamındaki 2 uzmanımız Valeria Valeri ve Magdalena Kuneva'dan dinleyeceğiz. Bunun yanı sıra söz konusu eğitimlerin ilerleyen dönemde faydalanıcı sektörlerin ve uzmanların sürece daha hızlı ve etkin şekilde dahil olabilmesine de yardımcı olacağını düşünüyoruz. Efsd, söz konusu eğitimlerimizde Efsd Plus'ın öncülü olan Efsd kapsamında yapılan çalışmalar da dahil olmak üzere Avrupa Birliği'nin garanti ve harmanlama, blending mekanizmalarının nasıl işlediğini görmek mümkün olabilecek. Uzmanlarımızca verilecek teorik bilgilerin yanı sıra Avrupa Birliği'nin finansal araçlarının gelişimi, garanti mekanizmasının farklı yatırım platformları çerçevesinde ve uygulamada nasıl işlediğine dair bilgiler alacağız. Aynı şekilde Avrupa Birliği'nin 6 Balkan ülkesindeki, Batı Balkan ülkesindeki yatırım projelerini yönettiği Batı Balkanlar Yatırım Çerçevesi, BİBİF diye kısaltıyoruz İngilizcesini, yapısı ve işleyişi hakkında da eğitimde bilgiler alacağız. Geniş katılımlı olarak ve 2 yarım gün halinde, yani yarın sabah yeniden devam edecek aynı eğitimimiz. Bu eğitimlere sorularınızla aktif katılımınız çok önem arz ediyor. Eğitim webinar düzeninde yapılacağı için sözlü soruları almıyoruz, ancak eğitim süresince soru cevap kısmında sorularınızı yazabilir. Hali hazırda yazılmış bir soruyu yöneltmek istediğinizde beğeni yaparak üst sırada yer almasını sağlayabilirsiniz. Eğitim boyunca simultane tercüme imkanımız olacak ve sorularınızı eğer İngilizce olarak yazarsanız daha hızlı bir şekilde cevaplanmasını da sağlamış olacağız. Ben eğitim programımızın tüm taraflar için verimli bir şekilde geçmesini diliyorum ve konuşmamı bitiriyorum. Çok teşekkür ederim. So the floor is yours. Valerie.
Thank you. Good morning. Günaydın. I hope all participants are connected. However, just in case, I will repeat something about the organization of today and tomorrow work. First of all, for all the participants, my name is Valeria Valeri, and it is really my great pleasure to address you today in the context of this event. As it was said, this is dedicated to the opportunities for Turkey under the new European Fund for Sustainable Development, Plus, financed by the European Union for the period 2021-2027. First of all, I wish to thank the Minister of European Affairs, the EU delegation to Turkey, and the technical assistance colleagues for the organization of these events, and of course, all the participants for their participation, for their attendance. Okay, I hope the participants will still see us, yes. So this event will have today 3 hours duration, and will continue tomorrow, also tomorrow starting at 9:30 and closing at 12:30, hopefully. It is an introductory event to this subject, and therefore it will be followed in May by a number of sectoral focus groups on the same subject, but with a sectoral focus, and which will be announced by the Ministry of European Affairs, EU Affairs, and the subject is the EU financial instruments such as blending and budgetary guarantees that will be available to Turkey under this new mechanism that was approved by the European Commission decision for Turkey on 31st of March 2022. To start with, and before we enter in the subject, I would like to briefly introduce my colleague and co-presenter, Magdalena Kuneva, and myself, and also to present you briefly the agenda today. Magdalena is a green financial instruments. I hope to say this correct, but she can add something later on. She has a wide international experience in several countries, and this experience has also included working with the European Commission as the project leader for piloting the European Fund for Sustainable Development, which is a predecessor of this European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus. Myself, just a few words. Some of the participants probably have met me because I worked in Turkey with the Ministry of Industry and Technology for 2 years. I am a financial instruments expert, and I started my professional experience with a public financial institution in Italy, where I was managing EU funds, supporting infrastructure and small and medium enterprises development. After this, I have worked in several countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and mainly Croatia, Romania, Serbia, and Albania. And in this region, called the Western Balkans, of 6 countries, I have worked several years for the blending mechanism that is called the Western Balkans Investment Framework that will be presented later. Today, there will be 2 presentations. A first introductory presentation that I will start in a minute and will be continued by Magdalena until the break. At 10:45, it is planned, according to the agenda, a short break for 50 minutes. And then I will deliver the second presentation on EU blending. We expect and encourage the participants to send the questions in writing, possibly in English, probably using the question and answers facility that has box in the bar, I mean, at the bottom of the screen. You can see it. We have envisaged to dedicate around 30 minutes for the answers to your questions, but of course, depending on the number of your questions, perhaps it will not be possible to discuss all questions, and therefore there will be a written follow-up to the questions. I hope you may write your questions in English, but otherwise it will be possible probably to manage this with interpretation. At 12:15, we are planning to wrap up this morning section to flag the main takeaways of the day that will be the starting point also for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the subject will be the EFDS plus guarantee, and Magdalena will provide some practical insight of budgetary guarantees and myself on blending through some good practice example and experience. So I wish to all of us a fruitful time together today, and I would move now, with your permission, to the first presentation. I think we are on time, and let's try to continue to be on time. So the first presentation is titled Setting the Scene, meaning that to set the framework of this presentation. And something is, sorry, there should have been, oh, okay, now it's appearing. There should have been this figure. So the global financial framework is that there are huge investment gaps in the key sustainable development goals sectors. And I hope all of you are familiar with the sustainable development goals, because they virtually cover all development needs. And the grant assistance is called, in the terminology of EU and OECD, official development assistance, can cover only partially these global investment gaps. This figure that is presented here shows that the total annual investment needs all over the world, they are in the measure of trillions of US dollars every year, and only one part of these needs are covered by grant assistance, official development assistance, how it is termed. And there is a huge gap. These figures that you can see was in the past before the COVID, and now it has increased due to the COVID. So it is even more than 2.5 trillions of USD dollars every year. Which are the global financial trends? I think they are under our eyes, so perhaps I see that the figures, they come with some delay, but so as you know, the COVID has had a very high impact on the social and economic development in the last 2 years. And there is, as you know, the war in Ukraine. From the beginning of the year and even on the last quarter of last year, we have witnessed higher and raising energy costs, higher cost of raw materials, high inflation, and this is specifically higher in Turkey, and introducing high risks for the investors. And other issues are, of course, have of course an impact on the global economic recovery. And so are the investment needs to tackle the sustainable development goals that are ambitious in terms of the green agenda and the sustainable development goals agenda. We may see that the COVID has produced a social shock, and in the short term, there are immediate needs, particularly from the industry, the health sector, food sector, and gender equality. But as we move to the medium term demand, then there is also an effect on jobs, particularly jobs, education, and disparities and consumption. And in the longer term, that is our also main interest, is that the investment has been depressed because there is a high level of debts that prevents this investment. And therefore, in the long term, there is certainly an impact in the key sectors like infrastructure, energy, water, climate, nature, and sustainability of cities. So this long-term impact, it is something that should be addressed, and the financial instruments of the European Union could contribute to this. Also in Turkey, there are huge investment needs. They are known also through the National Development Plan. And due to the general financial framework, we may highlight some elements that are relevant for this discussion today. First of all, the public investment in Turkey has been stable as a 4% of a gross domestic product. Until 2019, it was close to the 4%, and in the last years, it has decreased and about in the average with 1 percentage point. So this means that there is public investment, also a public investment gap to be taken. Another element is that there has been decreasing direct foreign investment in Turkey. Also in this case, this is also the consequence of the perceived risk on the financial market, the inflation forecast, and this is generally an indicator that the investment prospects should be supported by public intervention. And then, last but not least, there are the climate challenges, critical environmental and climate challenges for Turkey. That means additional investment needs, private and public in this field. Now, having set in this framework, we should look at the evolution of the EU financial instruments. The financial instruments have evolved from EU direct grants that were generally mobilized in the partner countries and also in the European Union member states by the European Union. Also in the member states, there is an increasing use of other instruments in addition to the grants, and these are the guarantees and blending. And Of course, although it is intuitive to be understood, the guarantees reduce the risk because somebody is paying part of the losses if they occur. And the blending is the use of public funds combining some grants with some loans. So the blending means generally one grant to cover investment needs and technical assistance combined with loans or other risk sharing instruments. It is important to underline that these instruments, financial instruments, they should address the EU policy priorities. For those who are involved in IPA 3 programming, this is something very well known, that there are the EU policy priorities that are contained in the IPA 3, that are presented in the IPA 3 programming framework. And therefore, also the EU financial instruments should target these EU policy priorities that are, and generally three big blocks of them, jobs and growth, inclusive growth. So the jobs is support to the micro, small and medium enterprises, and inclusive growth for employment, education, health, and social inclusion. A key policy for the European Union and also for Turkey is the Green Deal. It is needless to say that the environmental and climate change is in focus in the agenda of every country who has joined the Agenda 2030, and this is the utmost policy priority for investment under the financial instruments. Turkey has challenges in this sector, especially for exports. I think it is not now the case to expand on the EU carbon border adjusting mechanism, but this is certainly one more reason to invest in the green financial instruments. Then connectivity. Connectivity is investment in connectivity is about digital, the digital agenda, energy, and transport. And Turkey has huge needs also in this sector. And for example, it is enough well placed about broadband connectivity. However, for fiber, the connectivity is below the OECD average, the average of OECD countries. And also for cable, for fiber and cable, while for DSL, Turkey is even above Italy and Germany, for example. So it is a mixed picture, but requires investment. I would like to stop here and give the floor to my colleague. And so we will change, with your permission, the PowerPoint. The floor is yours, Magdalena, if you may manage to share your PowerPoint. Yes. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Valeria, for the first part of this presentation. We wanted to give a bit more detail on the European Fund for Sustainable Development and the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, which is a major EU innovation. That's basically because the EFSD Plus guarantee for the period 2021-2027 will accumulate significant amount of EU resource. It doesn't mean that the guarantee would be the only financial tool. Of course, the European Union would continue using grants and technical assistance and support blending operations as before. However, it is a major innovation in terms of increasing the use of budgetary guarantees in support of EU's external action. And we wanted to give a bit of a flavor what it means in this session, while tomorrow, during the more detailed session on the EFSD Plus guarantee, we will go deeper and into the details of how this mechanism is implemented, what the main features are, and I'll also give some examples of typical guarantee structures using some of the experiences from the signed guarantee agreements. I think it was also mentioned from the introductory remarks from the ministry that this new instrument is building on a pilot that was piloted for the period 2017-2020. So in terms of what the EFSD Plus guarantee is, first of all, there is a new external action guarantee from the EU budget. It's a budgetary guarantee that is approximately 43 billion euro. And this external action guarantee is backing up the European Fund for Sustainable Development plus budgetary guarantee at around 40 billion euro. It also has amounts which are implemented through the European Investment Bank, coming to about 26 billion euro. It also has other windows which are implemented by a variety of financial institutions, counterpart financial institutions across different sectors. This is what we call open architecture, and that is about 13 billion euro. And these amounts are indicatively split across various regions. As you can see, I have tried to show the split. This is very indicative still, but more or less you could see significant allocations to the DGNE regions, which includes Turkey. The guarantee, the external action guarantee also has some support, which is for microfinance assistance and Ripatum loans. I'm not going to focus much more on it. Here, what I wanted to also mention is that the way budgetary guarantees work differently from grants is because not the full amount of the cash is basically of the support of the full amount of the fund is made available. There is a provisioning, meaning that, for instance, if the guarantee covers 1 million, just as an example, for private sector operations, only 50% of this 1 million will be provisioned in the EU budget. The provisioning rate is between 9% to 50%, and currently the provisioning fund is around 8.9 billion. And this is very important because it basically means that with less money, the EU can do more. I will explain this a bit more, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the numbers as they're significant. And as you can see from these numbers, there is a significant increase in the use of budgetary guarantees in this new financing period, 2021-2027. I mean, in terms of what to expect from this instrument, as I mentioned, approximately 40 billion EU budgetary guarantee. It will support both public and private investment. I will speak a bit more about this. The scope is global, including EU enlargement countries, including Turkey as well. This differs from the previous period between 2017 and 2020, when the instrument was piloted. The focus then was on selected regions, so the regions were Sub-Saharan Africa and the European neighborhood. The guarantee was much smaller in amount. The budgetary guarantee was 1.5 billion. However, currently the scope is expanding. As I mentioned, it would cover, broadly speaking, EU's cooperation with the neighborhood, the African continent, also Asia Pacific. It also will cover a full spectrum of investment from sovereign to private sector. And the use of this instrument is programmed to ensure alignment with the priorities that Valeria discussed in the previous slides, as well as the partner country needs. It also follows an open architecture approach, meaning that the instrument can be implemented with a variety of partners, and that's quite important as different partners bring different expertise, different experience, also not just in terms of the instruments that they use, but also in terms of the geographies that they can cover. So having more partners mean that there is more opportunity for innovative products and more opportunity for engaging private sector in this broad geography. And the different modalities, so I mentioned under Efsd Plus, a growing importance of budgetary guarantees, which are supported by significant amounts through the external action guarantee, but there is also blending cooperations, technical assistance, and all of these complements are the forms of EU support. So this is all part of the toolbox that EU can use to deliver on overarching policy priorities, but it's not the only tool. I mentioned a broad support to investments that would be ensured through this instrument. First of all, there would be dedicated windows which are implemented through the European Investment Bank, and these are specifically for sovereign and non-commercial sub-sovereign operations. So these are public investments and which have low revenue generating rate, and they require support. And in this case, the beneficiaries are either governments, government entities, which are fully backed by the state, whether it's by a treasury guarantee or basically they can't directly finance themselves in the markets, they cannot borrow directly. These are usually large infrastructure projects. And these are the kind of investments that would be encouraged by this window implemented through the European Investment Bank. The size is approximately 11 billion that's allocated to this window. There is also a commercial sub-sovereign window, which is basically meant to support projects of public entities that are able to finance themselves in the market. And there is financing under this window, which would be implemented by the European Investment Bank, but it's not exclusive only to the European Investment Bank. We expect similar operations also by some of the other counterparts. This financing is important also for public infrastructure on subnational levels, specifically, for instance, for public utilities. And this financing will be implemented with this lower provisioning rate, meaning that more operations can be covered. And finally, there is also a window which is supporting private sector operations. I mentioned that there would be a variety of counterparts that are implementing these operations, these European and international development finance institutions. They could be also other financial entities, as long as they meet the requirements as established in the relevant EU regulation. In this case, beneficiaries are a wide range of private sector businesses. This ranges from micro businesses, SMEs, to mid-caps, large corporates. There are a variety of examples and financial structures that are supported. It could be direct investments, it could be investments through local financial intermediaries. And we will focus on these examples in the tomorrow's session. Basically, these are the operations which will be covered under the so-called open and collaborative architecture. So all these operations, whether public or private, are implemented either through the dedicated windows, through the European Investment Bank, or through the European and international financial institutions under the open architecture approach, specifically for the private sector and some of the commercial sub-sovereign operations. just maybe to focus a bit more before we go into Turkey's investment platform, I wanted to give you a bit of background. I mentioned in my opening remark that the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus for the period 21-27 is a continuation of a previous instrument. And the previous instrument was the European Fund for Sustainable Development, which is one of the pillars of the external investment plan of the EU. So as a pillar of the external investment plan, it combined blending operations and this new budgetary guarantee, which was 1.5 billion. And the idea was, by creating this new financial instrument, to bring together budgetary guarantees and blending operations into regional investment platforms to ensure that significantly more finance is crowded in. And right now, what I can say is that all the 1.5 billion of guarantees have been allocated. There are 18 signed guarantee agreements already from this period with counterpart implementing partners, financial institutions. In addition, there are 181 blending operations which have been supported. Actually, the initial amounts for blending, 2.6 billion, were actually exceeded to 3.5 billion euro. And this financing, around 5 billion under the European Fund for Sustainable Development, mobilized 50 billion of investment. So achieving 10 times more investment compared to the allocated support. And this is the innovation. The innovation here is that with a limited amount of EU funding, the budgetary guarantees and the investment grants that are used in combination with partner financial institutions' loans can crowd in significantly more capital, both public and private capital. The European Fund for Sustainable Development was actually mirroring a similar initiative, which was introduced under for the EU. You've probably heard about the European Fund for Strategic Investments, so Efsd, the so-called Efsd, to implement the investment plan for Europe, which is also known as the Juncker Plan. I mean, this is basically a similar initiative, but for inside the EU. And this initiative, FC initiative, will be then, in this new financing period, it will be continued through InvestEU. InvestEU is also building, it's also using budgetary guarantee approach. From both these examples, InvestEU for inside the EU with some opportunities for partner countries to participate in InvestEU, and the Efsd Plus, which supports EU operations in external action. What I can say is that there is significant increase in the use of budgetary guarantee, and this is a significant opportunity for Turkey to leverage these trends in support of Turkey's investment needs. How can Turkey do this? I want to draw your attention to the Turkey investment platform. As mentioned in the opening remarks, it's a mechanism which was already established by a Commission decision. It is the only partner country with a dedicated platform, which is actually a very, very large opportunity for Turkey to be very active in the Turkey investment platform. But it's mirroring similar investment platforms which exist in other regions. This is because the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus is composed of regional investment platforms. So there are regional investment platforms for Sub-Saharan Africa, for the neighborhood, for Western Balkans through the Western WBF, which is the Western Balkan Investment Framework, as well as now for Turkey through the Turkey investment platform. And this mechanism is very important because it can facilitate coordination of investments which are deployed under the Efsd Plus instrument. As I mentioned, these are both blending projects and budgetary guarantees. This is ensured because the Turkey investment platform will have regular meetings. It would receive guidance from the overarching Efsd strategic board, which would support the Commission by providing overall strategic orientations and guidance, while the Turkey investment platform as the investment platform at operational level would provide implementation support. It will provide, it will have an operational board that would give opinion to the Commission on the selection of blending operations or the use of external action guarantees under Efsd+, because as I'll explain more tomorrow, during tomorrow's session, we expect a number of investment proposals that would cover also Turkey, and selection will have to be made across criteria established by the Commission. So a very important role of the operational board of the Turkey investment platform is to provide such opinion on how exactly the external action guarantee under Efsd+ would be used. Also to look into the pipeline of projects, pipeline of operations, look into results, discuss progress. It will be an opportunity to ensure greater coordination and alignment with all those financial institutions that implement the budgetary guarantees or are also leading blending operations. So significant opportunity for Turkey to move beyond ad hoc approach to a more coordinated approach, to really leverage these new financial instruments by using external action guarantees and blending very strategically for Turkey to meet Turkey's investment needs in line with the priorities that are guiding the use of this instrument. And deliver at the end of the day on the investment needs in terms of crowding in additional finance. As mentioned, there are significant gaps in the amounts of available resources. So a significant opportunity for working with the private sector and for mobilizing additional finance, both public and private. I would like to stop here in the interest of time, to give also more time for a bit of time right now for a health break. I think it is important that we break for a few minutes and we can come back unless there are questions that we want to take. Valeria, do we still have time for a few questions, or we break for a
yes. No, thank you, Magdalena. I think that we need to wrap up this section, and we can perhaps have the break a little bit earlier at 10:30, but we have heard information, the last information on the Turkey investment platform, and I would like to wrap up by starting from this. The Turkey investment platform is just, as Magdalena said, is not a fund. It is a mechanism, and as a mechanism, it is together with the other platforms that were mentioned, because there is a platform, the Western Balkans investment platform, there is the neighborhood platform that is for countries in Eastern Europe, the African platform. So all these platforms have access to this new mechanism of the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus. But being this access to the mechanism, what is very important is, and I will go back to one element of the presentation by Magdalena, it is important to have in mind three main elements. The first is the focus of investment that can be proposed. You, as all the audience will realize from the presentation, from the combined presentation of today and tomorrow, the same investment can be appropriate for budgetary guarantee or for blending, and it is important to understand when to activate what type of instrument. But of course, the focus should be on that investment that is that is a priority in connection with the EU policies and is a priority also for Turkey. And therefore, there is one element that is the focus, the policy focus or the sector focus. And the second element is that this investment, the investment potential should be, as it is in the other platforms, identified and included in national project pipelines. This is the second element that we will see also later in the other presentations. Then a third element that I would like to highlight is the fact that there can be several beneficiaries for this new mechanism. The first beneficiary is, of course, the government and government bodies, and this is what not Magdalena has presented, but what is defined in the terminology, sovereign and non-commercial sub-sovereign type of support. So one is the investment by government bodies that can be, for example, the large infrastructure projects. So this is one type of beneficiary. Then is the beneficiary that propose commercial type of investment. And Magdalena rightly underlined that these beneficiaries include the public utilities that can finance themselves on the market, but under certain conditions, they can also receive blending finance or budgetary guarantees. And finally, is the private sector. And it is very important to highlight that especially the guarantees may help to reduce the perceived risk, because especially in the current financial environment in Turkey, it is the access to credit, to loans, it is more difficult. And finally, I think it's also crucial to consider that under the current funding, for example, for IPA 3, the amounts of assistance are not so huge, and therefore there is certainly a gap that can be addressed, considering that these new financial opportunities may leverage higher amount of funds by putting together what Magdalena defined as an open architecture, putting together several different financial institutions which will share the provision of finance and the provision of risk. So I think we have introduced all the terminology that we need to go ahead. And therefore, I also invite you, if you already, after this presentation, if you already have questions, to address them in the question and answer section. And therefore, I propose, if there are no objections to this, that we anticipate the break with 50 minutes, but still we maintain it at 50 minutes. So the break will start now, and let's say 10:30, and we should be back.
Actually, Valeria, as we
yes.
still have 5 minutes and we are getting questions from the audience I think it's better if we actually address. We still have a few minutes and break as planned.
Okay.
Good question. Thanks a lot. That's a very good question in terms of are loans necessarily backed by the guarantees. So if I'm to recap, basically, I didn't want to go too much into the detail because I don't want to spoil tomorrow's session, which is focused on the budgetary guarantees. But basically the way it works, as I started explaining, is that if there is a grant, then there is a commitment of funds. That commitment of funds is used and there is no reflows back to the EU budget. When there is a budgetary guarantee, this is an unfunded instrument. There is no transfer of funds. So think about this. There is no transfer of funds to the implementing partner. It's unfunded. This is a major difference from funded instruments where actually funds are transferred. So if there is a budgetary guarantee, there is no transfer of actual funds. What is happening is that provisionally there is liabilities which are booked for the EU budget, and there is some amount of money, but not the full amount of money, which is put in common provisioning fund. So this is the reserve that will be used to basically cover losses to the extent losses occur. And these provisioning amounts differ according to the investment windows. I explained this, and the provisioning amounts are higher when it comes to a private sector operation lending, but still it's not the full amount. So it means that with 50% of the same money, the EU can provide a guarantee, which is covering much larger volume of operations. What are really these operations? These budgetary guarantees can cover a variety of financial instruments and structures and guarantee structures. They can cover risks under loans, including subordinated loans. This could be also equity investments. It could be quasi-equity investments. It could be guarantees, which are provided through the local financial sector, for example. So it's not just loans. That is one thing that I wanted to explain. It is basically a variety of financial instruments that can be backed up by budgetary guarantees, which really means in reality that budgetary guarantees allow the counterpart financial institutions that implement them to do riskier things, to do riskier operations. For instance, to work with smaller local financial intermediaries that otherwise they would not consider because they're too risky, or these are new local financial intermediaries which are also too risky otherwise without the budgetary guarantee. It could be also that it is used to support innovative financial products which are untested, so considered too risky, or target groups which are considered too risky. So we are talking here about new technologies in the green sectors. We're talking about excluded groups or groups that are underserved. So the budgetary guarantees allow the financial institutions to do this. Without the budgetary guarantees, the risk appetite would be less. And this is really following this discussion globally that there is significant gap for delivering the sustainable development goals on the Paris Agreement objectives, and more finance needs to be crowded in. But the way finance can be crowded in is by de-risking these investments. And that's the mechanism. So indeed, budgetary guarantees can de-risk, meaning can encourage lending through the financial institutions that implement them. The lending can be directly in projects, or it could be through local financial intermediaries. They can also back up equity instruments, quasi-equity investments, guarantees that are provided, for instance, on financial products extended by local financial intermediaries, a wide variety of financial instruments. And tomorrow we are also going to talk about a new development which is linked to trying to tap in more into innovative forms of finance, sustainable finance. These are capital market instruments, green bonds, blue bonds, sustainability bonds. A lot of innovation is taking place in terms of sustainable finance, in terms of mobilizing additional finance to, to meet today's challenges, which are linked to both mitigation and adaptation and building resilience to climate change. I'm all very well aware of the fire. I mean, for instance, the fires that affected Turkey last season, and I'm sure Turkey is also struggling with some of the climate changes that we see. It also has a very rich maritime industry, a lot of opportunity to use these instruments for alignment. However, of course, there are other loans, other operations which do not require budgetary guarantee because they could be provided on market terms. So budgetary guarantees are not necessary in all cases. They're only necessary if there are specific market gaps, if there are investment conditions which would not allow the investment operations to be easily financed without this budgetary guarantees. So yes, they could be lending without budgetary guarantees, but the budgetary guarantees allow the counterpart financial institutions to do more and to do riskier things in new sectors specifically, or in new market segments, or target new new beneficiary groups or underserved groups. I hope I answered the question, but thanks a lot. This was a very good question. I can see that there is also a very good question about the difference between InvestEU and the Turkey investment platform. Excellent question as well. As I mentioned, the InvestEU is actually also a budgetary guarantee instrument. Turkey investment platform is specific for Turkey, but it is part of the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus. The difference, which is also using budgetary guarantee plus a limited amount of grants to support very selected blending operations. The difference with InvestEU is that InvestEU, so the instrument is similar, and the principles around InvestEU and Efsd plus budgetary guarantees are very similar principles. There are differences in terms of governance mechanism and in terms of how the implementation of InvestEU and the Efsd plus Turkey investment platform will take place. Under InvestEU, 75% will be implemented through the European Investment Bank. Under Efsd plus, as I mentioned, there is there are opportunities under the open architecture for a greater variety of counterpart financial institutions. However, there are also dedicated windows, which are also for implemented through the European Investment Bank. So Turkey has an opportunity also to join InvestEU. But Turkey also has an opportunity under the external action agenda of the EU, under Efsd plus. The investment windows are also different. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. There are some overlaps, but there are different priorities also under external action compared to inside the EU, because InvestEU is meant for inside the EU. So Turkey has advantages that it can actually look at both. In terms of yes, being eligible for Efsd plus funds, would there be an added value of joining InvestEU? Absolutely, I think so. As I mentioned, investment windows are different, first of all. Secondly, under InvestEU, national promotional banks can also implement some of the financing. And thirdly, I think it is building the experience to work with budgetary guarantee. Let's just put it very simply. A huge amount of EU budget resources would be managed through budgetary guarantees. It's a new instrument. It's an advantage to Turkey to be able to build this experience by looking across and working with both InvestEU and Turkish investment platform under Efsd plus. I also think this would also generate more opportunities for crowding in finance to Turkey and attracting innovative financial products. That is briefly, I think with this we can now go to a health break, which we have for 15 minutes, and I encourage you to do that.
Yes. Just a second, Magdalena, I think if I may add, because I understand the meaning of this question, as an economist, perhaps, and I think we can leave it open for further thinking. Why? Because, of course, joining the EU Invest program has a cost in the terms of entry tickets, I guess. And therefore, there is probably, or if I have understood correct, this question is also addressing the fact that it should be assessed whether there is this added value, I mean, or because I think this is the spirit of the question, and we can try to elaborate further tomorrow, that joining the EU Invest program, I think, you know, I believed that Turkey has already joined it, but perhaps I am not correctly informed. But of course, this has a cost for Turkey, and it can be compared with the cost of other instruments, but I think that the mechanisms are different and they can be devoted to different type of investment and needs, which requires a deep understanding of the relevant window that will be, as we anticipated at the beginning, will be the subject of sectoral focus meetings in May. I think it will be important to deep this subject and to see, especially for the private sector, what does it mean? What are the opportunities under one and the other instrument? And I think that we should take this question over also for the sectoral focus meetings that will be done. Okay. Yeah.
We could go into coffee break because we're going to overrun time, and the next session is we are already over time.
Yes, yes. But if you want to conclude,
can I say words? Good morning.
Yes,
everyone.
please, please.
I think we have to really, perhaps, you know, reshuffle a bit of the content in one or two slides for later today and tomorrow. Because definitely EFSD Plus and Invest EU, as much as they are all about financial instruments, they are different, completely different. And perhaps not only Invest EU, but also linkages with the single market program should be investigated further, because InvestEU is right now everything that was financial instruments in the previous MFF, multi-annual financial framework. Right now, you know, the whole lending towards Erasmus Plus, the whole lending, you know, that we could see under COSME in the past, under Horizon 2020 in the past, is inside InvestEU. So we are also looking for a kind of advice in Turkey, how to go about it, because not the whole InvestEU makes sense for Turkey. For instance, there was a lot of lending made under the LIFE program. And we have, you know, good stories and not so good stories in Turkey coming from the financial instruments from the previous perspective. And then TIP. Yes, we need to at some point draw a borderline between what makes sense when we go for InvestEU and what makes sense when we go for TIP. And how to organize those financial instruments between the two completely different financial envelopes. And the Commission can't advise us. The Commission can't advise us, unfortunately. So there are ongoing negotiations to join InvestEU when it comes to Turkey. But how many pillars of the InvestEU are going to be tapped into or will be tried to tap into is still unknown. So if you could please, ladies, to how can I put it, provide a piece of advice, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. under Invest EU. TIP is a different story, but the borderline, demarcation line, that's the most important story. We know very well that, for instance, loans for students under Erasmus Plus previously were not very successful. We know very well that lending towards the previous ERC program were not very successful. But for instance, guarantees, counter guarantees and portfolio guarantees towards the Turkish Credit Guarantee Fund were very successful, for instance. So we need to have not only a discussion, not only about what is in the legislation, but also what could make sense for Turkey to pay the entry ticket for the whole or part of the Invest EU. TIP is a different story. We agree on that. That would be my food for thoughts before the day.
Definitely, Thomas, I can only agree with you, because the investment windows, as you mentioned, are different. There are some overlaps, but it allows prioritization. And the Turkey investment platform, which is under Efsd Plus, can have this very important role in terms of driving the prioritization. For instance, MSMEs are priorities under both Invest EU and the External Action Guarantee. Well, amounts for the budgetary guarantees, at the end of the day, the volumes are unknown, and Turkey could say we can benefit from Invest EU to support these counter guarantees that you mentioned through the local financial sector for MSMEs, while under the External Action Guarantee, we can do more innovative things in sustainable finance, in the green sectors. This is really the prioritization so that there is advantages. It's not a fixed amount that is just distributed in the way it was done previously in the programming. So I can't agree more with you, and thanks for these additional thoughts.
Okay. All right. And could you please also, Magda, try to put a bit of thinking into eligibility conditions for the Turkish financial institutions to take part in it? Which ones should be pillar assessed and which do not have to pillar assessed?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a good question. In the remaining 2 minutes, if I can summarize it very briefly, the eligibility criteria for the implementing partners require that they are so-called 7-pillar assessed. So there are 7 pillars. So looking at internal controls, at audit, at risk management capacities, capacities to deal with EU requirements, for instance, in terms of money laundering. All this is assessed. This is 7 pillars, so it's a lengthy process for a financial institution to be able to manage funds from the EU budget. And we have international and European development finance institutions which have passed the pillar assessment. So these are bilateral development finance institutions, also multilateral. So, and I can give the examples of EIB, of EBRD, also KfW, AFD, FMO. These are institutions which are already working with financial instruments, having passed the pillar assessment. However, there is an important derogation in the regulation that governs the use of budgetary guarantee in external action, and that derogation allows actually additional number of entities to implement the budgetary guarantees. The idea is to attract private sector entities, to attract more innovation, more innovative financial structures, as long as they provide financial assurances that they could manage the budgetary guarantees. So it's not just the pillar assessed financial institutions, which are public financial institutions, whether multilateral or bilateral, but also additional entities under private law which could be also in partner countries, that could be approved to use the budgetary guarantees. It's not an easy process because this is indirect management of EU funds. A lot of requirements are there. Additional assurances of financial capacity need to be provided, but it is possible. And there is growing interest in variety of financial institutions, funds to actually manage the budgetary guarantees for de-risking operations. To do more, that otherwise they cannot basically, without the guarantee, they wouldn't be able to do more in terms of their own operations using a budgetary guarantee, a wider variety of entities. We expect this also in the next period.
Yes. Thank you, Magdalena. We have been able to respond to some questions, but now we go following the agenda into the break. And please see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies. And big clap to all the participants.
Should we resume our presentation? Are the participants back? So I propose we start back.
I am back, you know, Valeria, thank you for reminding us. And
okay, great. Yes. Okay, so I propose we start back.
Yes.
With this more relaxing, I hope, presentation on blending. In the previous presentation, we heard a lot of technical terminology, counter guarantees, but of course, the audience is very diverse. So we have public institutions, also financial intermediaries. So tomorrow, hopefully, we will go back to that terminology. I propose that we now dedicate, according to the agenda, a presentation on EU blending. And this presentation will have an average duration of 45 minutes and leave the time for questions that hopefully will be received. Let's see if this is moving. That's curious. Okay. So blending, the first subject is what is blending? Some of you are familiar with this concept and some are less. The blending, as it was said before, is combining a grant with a loan or risk share instrument. And this grant could be a grant for technical assistance to support the preparation or to support implementation, and or an investment grant. There are some blending operations, including a grant only for technical assistance, and other including also a grant for technical assistance and a grant for investment. And we will see when this is done and why. So generally speaking, for the blending operation funded by EU to take place, it is necessary that there is an interested, there is first of all an investment, then an interested in financial institution, and then the financial institution will provide finance and the EU will provide the grant. This is schematically, generally speaking. So the use of the grant support by the EU will create a leverage on the EU funds, because this grant should be used, the technical assistance or investment grant, to mobilize more finance as from additional sources than the EU. Now, which could be these forms of support under blending? As we said, most commonly technical assistance, which is key and should always be there under blending. Investment grants, and we will get back to discuss about the size of these investment grants and when they come into the picture. It could be interest rate subsidies, generally not, as it is written here, generally not the preferred form of support under blending. And it could be other components, risk sharing instruments, being this, of course, risk sharing instruments could be loans or could be budgetary guarantees in this case, and another instruments of risk capital. For example, in the European Union, there are this, here you see the acronyms of the European Fund for Strategic Investment, that is a fund available in the European Union for strategically important investment projects. And the other acronym, GGF, is the Green for Growth Fund. So these are structured funds addressing specific sectors of investment. Now, to exemplify how it works, I am going to present the example of the Western Balkans Investment Framework blending mechanism. This is a platform that is operational in the 6 Western Balkans countries that you probably know are Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Albania, and which one is missing? Then this mechanism, how it works. First of all, it addresses both the public sector and the private sector. And the public sector is generally addressed under this mechanism, not yet with guarantees. This will follow in this period, but until now, in the 2014-2020, this has been through investment grants and technical assistance grants. For the private sector sees several regional initiatives under this platform, Western Balkans Investment Framework. And one is the Western Balkans Enterprise Development and Innovation Facility called EDIF. And this facility may include technical assistance grants, risk, sorry, it's a small error, risk. No.
Excuse me, Valeria, if I can interrupt a bit.
Yes.
When you are talking about this private sector support, is it done under the umbrella of multi-country programs?
Generally, thank you for the question. Generally, as it was also explained earlier on, the support to the private sector is done by through financial intermediaries, so international financial institutions working with local financial institutions. Therefore, it is generally available, activated in each country, because one potential beneficiary may address these instruments through local commercial banks, which are in agreement, which have joined the agreement. So it is available directly in each beneficiary country. And so depending on the specific regional initiative that is involved, this may include investment grants, technical assistance grants, and risk sharing instruments in a combination between them. Then there is also under this instrument a guarantee facility that is generally addressed to all public, central public, municipal, and private sector operations. So this is the way it works, but we will go a little bit deeper in that during this presentation.
Thank you.
Now, which are the objectives? And generally, when we refer to the objectives, at least myself, I am referring to the objectives of the European Union on the one side that is providing the finance, and also the objective of the recipient that should mirror one another. So first of all, the financial leverage, it was already mentioned that putting together some public funds and private funds provided in the form of risk-sharing instruments by the financial institutions, there is a leverage that it is averaging 10 to 12 times in the experience of this instrument, but as we will see, it can be variable. It depends on a case-by-case basis. Then is the non-financial leverage. What is this? For example, by using in a sound way the technical assistance support that is granted, that is through the grant, it is clear that it may help a better preparation, so a quality preparation of the investment, thus diminishing the risk, the time to market, etc. It can support a faster project start, and it can support higher sustainability of the investment. So this non-financial leverage is addressing those components of the investment, non-material or soft components of the investment that, by the way, are generally incurred at the beginning, pre-investment, and then during the investment, especially for those investments which are long-term and can go ahead several years. The policy leverage. The policy leverage is one of the reasons and one of the drivers why the European Union activates these type of facilities or platforms, because the funds are intended to target the EU policy reform priorities. So the investment that is addressed should contribute to implement reforms or priorities in line with the European Union. Financial support effectiveness refers as an objective to the cooperation between several donors or several financial institutions, because combining the resources through a blending operation allows to maximize the impact and to minimize the cost. For example, it goes without saying, but when there is an element, a guarantee element, the cost of the credit is decreased. So this is one of the objectives of blending operation. And finally, the visibility. The visibility is mostly referred to the European Union and the donors, because there is more visibility for EU funds when these addressed a development objective, so a tangible investment. This, we spoke already about the financial leverage. Its size is very important, because this, in the EU Western Balkans Investment Framework Facility or platform, it has varied from 3 to 24 times. Of course, it depends on the investment, and it depends. We have tomorrow some examples taken from the EU WBIF facility. It depends very much also from the nature of the investment, because in some cases there are several components in the operation. So there is a technical assistance grant, a technical investment grant, there is a loan, even more loans. There are loans by the international financial institutions, other loans from commercial local banks of the country where the investment takes place. There is the co-financing by the beneficiary, for example, when these are public utilities. So the financial mix in each operation can be different, and this difference may raise the leverage, as you can see, because this is experienced up to 24 times. But the average is 10, 11 indeed. Now, some few guiding principles these guiding principles are, by the way, published by the OECD in their guidance on blended finance. So you may be able to expand on this, but just few, and I think they just repeat partially what was said. What was said through the previous presentation. First of all, anchor blended finance to a development rationale. This refers to the fact that blending finance should cover operations for which a clear impact can be estimated, and not only can be estimated or anticipated but the performance results should be stated from the very beginning. As we will see, because generally these operations are of a certain nature where there are not only financial results, but also economic results, which means the benefits for the general population, for the environment, for the local communities. And these benefits, these are called economic benefits because they are generally non-monetary benefits. So this, the development rationale that is a benefit, a non-monetary benefit, is one of the main drivers for the blending operations. The second principle is the one that has been mentioned before, that refers to the additionality and refers to the need to increase the mobilization of commercial finance, private sources finance. So this is a basic principle for blending. Because there is no blending without, for example, without a loan or without a guarantee, cannot be only grant. Then a third principle is that the blending operations should be contextualized and referred in the local context. And this means basically two things. One is probably intuitive, the other a little bit less. The first is that the development initiatives for blending operations should be initiated and originated by the local beneficiaries and be local development initiatives that are strategically important for the country. But the second is that depending on the type of investment, this should be in some cases also subject to local consultations. I know that several line ministries which have carried out infrastructure investments supported by the European Union or supported by international financial institutions have already undergone through the process of local consultations that can be needed, for example, in the context of an environmental impact assessment, or all the times when the financial institution requires that consultations are done In certain countries, for example, there are consultations that the International Financial Institution requires in a compulsory way in case the investment requires expropriations. This is, for example, an example. So this is about principle 3. There are only 5 principles, so please be patient, only another 2 more. The principle 4 is about effective partnering for the blending finance. This means that because, as we have seen in one, as I have said, not yet seen concretely, but in one blended operation, there can be several actors contributing finance. The European Union, financial institutions, the government, the public utilities, the local financial institutions, etc. It is crucial that there is an effective partnering around the operation. And finally, the principle of monitoring a blended operation means that there should be dedicated resources to monitor the operation. It's not that once the construction or the subject of the blended operation has been completed is finished. It should be resources to monitor, and also the transparency and the information that will be provided on the results of the operation is very important for the learning for the future for other similar operations or comparable operations. So these are good principles. Of course, it depends how they will work in practice. The additionality is the core principle, and the additionality is not only about the leverage, but it is about the results that the blending operation can add in terms of the policies and in terms of what can be achieved through the combination of the grant and the other risk sharing components. So it is clear that, as Magdalena explained previously, the blending operation should go to investment which are an important component, either in terms of innovation, in terms of tackling the green agenda objectives, or even where some other, the commercial funding would not go. And so there is also an important additionality element to allow investments that would not be achieved without the grant. So this is a component that should always be kept in mind, because it will be one important criterion for assessment if this if the investment should be done or not. I am watching at the agenda. We are in good time, so I would like to spend some words on this important table that determines when a project can in fact be blended or is eligible for blending. First of all, there are projects that now I will say something that many of you know already and some maybe not know. So I would like really to explore this table. There are projects which are financially feasible and other projects that are not financially feasible. What does it mean? That a project which is financially feasible, means that during its technical life, the life of the investment, this project is able to recover the initial investment done through the surplus between the revenues and the operational costs. So what does it mean? That typically, and you know, even a company, when a company makes an investment, consider to make the investment now and then probably to take a loan, and then that the revenues of this investment will be able to repay the loan. And I say the revenues, but in fact, the difference between the revenues and, you know, the net revenues. So the revenues, once deducted the operational costs of the investment. So an investment that is capable to repay itself over time is an investment that, and the project that can be considered financially feasible. And in fact, generally, when an investment is financially feasible, it is eligible for receiving credit from the private sector. And this is what generally happens, that the investor addresses commercial bank, the bank appraise that investment to assess that if it is indeed financially feasible, and if it is indeed financially feasible, the bank will extend, for example, a loan. So in this case, the project can be done by the private sector. When the project is not financially feasible because cannot, for example, we may make a common example. You invest in a road that has no toll to pay, is free of charge. In that case, the project is not financially feasible because there is an initial investment that will not attract cash revenues over time to repay this investment. So the investment is not financially feasible. I hope this concept is clear, but of course there could be questions later on. Then, what are the conditions for a project to be subsidized? Because we saw that if the project is financially feasible, it could be financed by the private sector, provided that, as you see in the other dimension, that the project is also economically feasible. What does it mean? Economically feasible, we said that this project will have benefits. So these are benefits. If it is project, you know, could be a project in the water sector, recovering the initial costs, and the benefits are benefits for the local communities, benefiting from these services, water services, but could be also a private investment. And to be economically feasible, it means that it is a project in legal sectors, you know, because not even a bank will finance a project that is financially feasible, but for example, illegal or doesn't produce economic benefits. So in this reasoning, if the project is financially not feasible, but it is economically feasible, so it has benefits that can be demonstrated and are in a certain level that should be calculated, then this project can be subsidized from public funds. And I think that this is very important to underline, because in some cases there is not a clear understanding that a project that is financially not feasible, but only partially, is, you know, it is not zero. For example, in the case of the roads, the project is financially not feasible 100% because there are no revenues. But there are projects where there are some revenues, but they are still insufficient to cover the initial investment. So in that case, if the investment is economically feasible because it displays benefits for the country, for the local communities, for the area where it is implemented, so it can be subsidized. And what happens is that if there is this partial coverage of the investment with the revenues, for that part, this project can receive loans, for example, and for the part where it is not covered by the revenues, it can receive an investment grant. Of course, I am simplifying just for the sake of understanding, but let's look at the entire table. And then going ahead, we are in the column where the project is financially feasible, but is economically not feasible. In this case, this project should not be carried out because it is clearly not advantageous for the society. You know, generally, the economic benefit is a benefit for the society. There are several projects that have been blocked on this basis. And also, so if the project is financially feasible, but economically not feasible, it should not be carried out in principle or should be taxed by the state to compensate for the negative effects. And if the project is financially not feasible and economically not feasible, of course, it should not be carried out. From this table, just to conclude, it is crucial that for a project to be subsidized through public funds, meaning in this case, EU grants for investment, for technical assistance, etc., there should be a demonstration that the project is financially not feasible or not entirely feasible from a financial point of view, but also that the project, most importantly, is economically feasible, meaning that the benefits are justifying the release of a public grant. I hope this table is clear and will help understanding of the subject, because the eligibility of an operation for blending should be considered according to this matrix. I hope it was not too much, this table, but some of you are very familiar and some are less familiar, so I want to explain better. Now, the additionality of EU contribution. And it is based on this gap between the financial returns and the economic returns, meaning that even if a project, an investment has not sufficient revenues, if there are sufficient benefits, it can be still implemented by combining grants and a part of loans. To give you an example that is an example under the Western Balkans investment framework, there has been, for example, a project for water and wastewater in a small locality on the Prespa Lake that is in the heart of Europe, in Central Europe, in a not densely populated area. So if an area is not densely populated, it means that the cost of bringing water pipes is higher and you have few recipients or the citizens or the companies to pay for the services. But of course, the water is needed and the wastewater should be addressed as an issue, because if there is no wastewater service, the lake will be polluted. So this is a typical project in an area where to strengthen the drinking water and wastewater services cannot be entirely covered by a loan because there are not sufficient revenues, but the benefits can be estimated and can justify this investment, and therefore this is a candidate under certain conditions for a blending operation financed by through EU contribution combined, because there is a gap between the financial returns that are insufficient and the economic returns that are high. In financial terms, this means that there is the so-called financial internal rate of return. Now this is not a lesson in finance, but let's say like the remuneration of the capital that would be insufficient for the private sector. But there is a high benefit for the society. So the grant, as we have seen, this grant or other forms of concessional finance can help to make this project happen, because only the private sector would not finance, but with this combination in a blending operation, this would be financed. And there are also some other elements that should be analyzed, and the size of the EU investment grant is generally calibrated or proportional to this element, because of course, as we have seen, the investment grant would cover only a part of the investment, and but this would be done in the sake of ensuring higher standards, affordability for the population, etc. I have almost finished. I will be on time. And now, one central element that was also discussed is what is the process to be followed to access blending operations. So first of all, the key element is generating a pipeline of potential candidates for blending. So to have several projects in several sectors and to be able to prioritize some projects for an early discussion with a financial institution. Generally, in the Western Balkans investment framework, there is no possibility to discuss about the grant component with the European Union without an early stage interest by one of the accredited international financial institutions or financial institutions of EU member states. So before applying and requiring support for a blended operation, there is a need of what is called the sponsor international financial institution or national financial institution of one member state, which states to be potentially interested to consider the granting of a loan for that project. The cycle is the usual cycle for whatever investment. So there is nothing new in the stages and the crucial stage for the assessment of the project by the international financial institutions and the Commission is the project preparation. The project, as we have said, through the documentation should demonstrate that it meets the criteria for the criteria that we saw already, criteria for as regards the policy, as regards the eligibility for grant finance, as we said in that table, that to be not financially feasible or not entirely financially feasible, and to have some documents for allowing for this assessment, and it is what under IPA is called the documents for the maturity assessment. So there should be some documentation that allows to assess that the project meets the criteria for a blended operation, there is sufficient information to go ahead. And then on the remaining part of the cycle, I think this is typical also for the normal actions financed under IPA, IPA 2, IPA 3, where there is a proposal submitted, and then this proposal is followed up by technical assistance, technical assessment, financing decision, contracting, depending what the operation is about, works, supplies, etc. And then the typical implementation, monitoring, and reporting, and evaluation. So this is all for now. And I propose, if there are some questions, that we discuss about these questions. So we have some time for the questions, and we have received one for the time being about the blended operations. And these questions reads like this: it is expected from a blending operation to make economically feasible, but financially not feasible projects to feasible projects. From additionality perspective, can we say grant component of finance made the project financially feasible? Oh, this is a really very good question. I'm not aware who is exactly the person who has done, but indeed, yes, I will provide an answer to this. Because how we discussed, we have, maybe we go back to that table, if possible. And maybe possible, maybe not. So just a second. I will try to go to the table. Here it is. Oh, no, sorry, I did something wrong, as usually. I was on the right table, however. Yes. Okay. Can you see the table? Yes. So the question is, if we have a project that is financially not feasible, if the grant can make it financially feasible. This is the, if we can say that. Indeed, what happens? If we have a project that is not financially feasible, partially, because we should have some, then what happens? We have what it can be called the financial gap, because there is a part of the investment, for example, just an example, is not all the cases like this. We have, for example, 50% of the investment can be covered by revenues that will be generated, it is expected that will be generated, and the other 50 needs a subsidy, and therefore, and this would be called the investment grant. And in addition, as we saw, there is always an technical assistance grant. But in this case, yes, by tapping the part that is financially unfeasible, the investment should become also financially feasible, because what would happen? That the initial investment, the part would be covered by the grant and the other part would be covered by a loan that at that point can be reimbursed. Of course, this is a simplification because then you need some calculations about, net present values of the investment, etc. But more schematically, the answer is yes. We have further questions. Just a second. Several questions below. I recognize the name of one of the participants from the Ministry of Industry and Technology. Hi, nice to see your questions. The question is, the WBIF has been in implementation since 2008. So how IPA and WBIF interact in the projects? In this specific case of the Western Balkans investment framework, the IPA, as it is known also in Turkey, it is implemented through annual programs that are bilateral programs. So these programs are dedicated to a country and financed through annual financing agreements. And then there are multi-country programs that receive a global allocation, and then this allocation is distributed, let's say, to the IPA beneficiaries. Therefore, the Western Balkans investment framework is not financed for each country through the financing agreements of the annual IPA, but it is financed regionally. So there is an allocation, Western Balkans investment framework, 1 billion, 2 billion, this is for the 6 countries. And it is a regional multi-country facility. And therefore, the basis of financing is IPA for the both, is the instrument for pre-accession for the both, but one is, this IPA goes to the annual allocations dedicated to each country and to the regional allocations that are accessed by the various countries in a competitive way in the cases of the Western Balkans. So the best projects or most important priorities for the Commission are financed under the Western Balkans investment framework. So it's still IPA, but 2 different instruments. I hope I answered, but of course, please also consider that if we don't succeed to answer to all the questions or the time is limited for the answer, there will be also a follow-up in writing with all these questions. The next question, I see that there are other questions from the same ministry, but I will go down in the sequence with your permission. So, next question is, what is included in the remuneration as opposed to what? They are moving these questions. Yeah, or they are, sorry, but there is another question, sorry, that is about, it is a little bit, sorry, but in my, at least in my screen, the questions are moving, so I cannot, but I will try to go in the order. So there is one other question that reads about the additionality. How can we be sure about what level we subsidize the intervention from the national or EU sources? Why not from the national sources, but from the UD or Efsd plus? How do we decide? This is excellent question, because first of all, it is always possible in a blended operation to finance from the national sources if these are available. And they can be national or, of course, sub-national. For example, one example in Western Balkans investment framework has been an operation, blended operation of sustainable transport for the city of Belgrade. To go, you know, sustainable transport, electric vehicles and other components. And in that case, there has been, for example, a part of grants from the EU, loans, and also sub-national contribution. How to decide? It depends. It is, you know, it depends on the type of operation on a case-by-case basis. It depends on the type, on the size, because as you have seen, the operation can have revenues at a certain level, maybe has not revenues, etc. So there is not a recipe to decide. It's generally explored together with the sponsor, international financial institution, on a case-by-case basis. But what is important is that the financial gap must be exactly determined. In some cases, it is there is no calculation needed, as in the example of the road I made at the beginning, a road without any revenue. In other cases, it must be calculated based on expected revenues. And then the financial package, the financial plan is discussed together with the financial institution. Also because in some cases, the financial institution proposed to cover the operation until a certain level, and therefore it is mandatory to identify some other sources. So for example, sources, the international financial institutions and local financial institutions, and also national and sub-national co-financing. We have other questions. What is included in remuneration as opposed to what may go under financial terms? Of course, the blending has a financial component, for example, a loan, which I would not say by definition, I don't want to use this terminology, but generally is in the combination is below the commercial market rates. And of course, in some cases it's extremely favorable. In some other cases, when there is also the need to combine the resources with local commercial resources, the average remuneration goes up. It could be, if there is a combination with the budgetary guarantee, it can become even more favorable. So generally, it is the total result in financial terms is a cost that is lower than the commercial market rates for the same investment. It is possible, is it possible to use a guarantee for sustaining an existing infrastructure, for example, maintenance of a dam? This is perhaps a question for Magdalena to answer, but however, if not, I mean, I don't know if you have an answer, Magdalena, on that.
Yes, I mean, what I can say is that the EFSD Plus guarantee is implemented through the financial institutions that are the implementing partners to support their operations and investments. So one of these operations could be, for instance, a credit line to a local intermediary. It could be a corporate finance to a corporate direct investment, or it could be project finance if there is, for instance, special purpose vehicle. So in this case, you're talking about maintenance of a dam. If there is need for lending to ensure this maintenance, if it's a new loan, that would ensure, for instance, more energy efficient activities, for instance, or investments that would ensure energy efficiency, just giving an example, then this new loan by the operator could be provided by, let's say, a local intermediary that uses actually a guarantee product through the EFSD Plus. So in other words, always when we talk about this actual investments or operations, we're looking into new investments and operations. So it's not old investments, it's not about old loans that can be now refinanced. There were some exceptions during the COVID-19 period, but overall the idea here is to direct finance and mobilize more finance for new operations and investments. So if it's a new operation, new investment, and there is a financial product and there is a guarantee that is backing this financial product, I see why not. But again, the actual operations in investments are selected during the implementation period of the guarantee agreement. So the first step is to have the broad investment areas. The second step is to have a guarantee agreement with the financial intermediary, which is implementing the budgetary guarantee of the EU. And only the third step is for this financial intermediary is to select their operations and investments, and they use their own internal processes. These are financial institutions for risk assessment, for due diligence. They could invest directly or through intermediaries. There are some eligibility criteria for the type of operations which are defined in the guarantee agreements. We do expect interest in the connectivity sector under the investment window, and definitely I think sustainable infrastructure would be a significant area of interest, and a variety of operations could be financed as long as there is a suitable product for them. So again, it depends because we're still in the beginning of the process, but I do expect similar operations.
Yes, thank you, Magdalena. Of course, this question, should be analyzed better in what sense that maintenance of a dam could be, I am not experts in dams, but generally could be the periodic reinvestment. I mean, is investment maintenance and not operational costs, because the operational costs should not be part of this type of operations.
But yes, the guarantee can support also
operational costs.
Operational costs, absolutely, very broad range.
Okay. Okay.
So it could be investment cost, could be operational cost. It is aimed to improve access to finance and mobilize investment into areas that are neglected, where you have significant investment gaps. So, but of course, it requires a financial product that is aimed at such investments and operations, but it could be also operational cost, yes, as long as it's new, yes. Okay. Again, it's not past operations. It's about new operations.
The next question is really crucial. It's a question that has been asked virtually in all countries. a general question, and thank you for this question. Based on the additionality principle of EU grants and its benefits, does the EU have a tendency to shift all investment operations which were normally implemented via EU grants under Ripatum under the Efsd plus and the Turkish investment platform during the IPA 3 and beyond? This question is, let's say, it has not a very straight answer, but I will try to answer to it. First of all, the funds under the annual programs are limited. And in some cases, there are some type of investments that if you place such investments, maybe 1 or 2 under an operational program, all the money is used by those investments. So indeed, there is, and it has been developed, there have been developed the demarcation criteria that for some types of investment, they exclude that these investments can be placed under the operation, under the annual programs, generally operational programs in some sectors, and they have in a mandatory way, because there is a question even below about the railway. For example, for the railway, there will be the finance, it will be limited to refurbishing railway stations, but not investment in the railway infrastructure that must, yes, go outside the annual programs. And in some cases, it's a matter of subject of the intervention according to the investment criteria. In other cases, the same investment is demarcated under the annual programs, annual or multi-annual, let's say country programs, where there is an allocation earmarked for Turkey in case of the operational programs, or generally there is the possibility to submit the projects under the annual programs, and demarcated vis-a-vis of interventions that should go under the TIP or Efsd plus. So the answer, why I said it is not straightforward, because there are practically 3 elements to be considered. The first are the demarcation criteria that do not allow some investments to be under the bilateral programs, annual or multi-annual, for Turkey, as it was in IPA 2. So in IPA 3, some types of intervention are not eligible under the bilateral program. The second is that there are some clear priorities for the European Commission that even under this demarcation, some interventions are eligible, but some are priority vis-a-vis of others. And therefore, this is also one additional reason that for which some operations could be moved outside the bilateral framework. But the third is the money. So it's not only the demarcation, but is the availability of funds, because the funds available to Turkey, when compared to the size of the country in the first instance, not only of the needs. You know, when we are talking of the Western Balkans investment framework, we are talking of countries with 2 million inhabitants, 7 million inhabitants. They are small countries. Turkey is a very large country, so the investment needs, and it's a larger country with a very vibrant private sector in many sectors. So the needs, the financial needs in the public and private sector are huge and cannot in any possible way be accommodated under the annual, multi-annual programs. So the combination of these elements, the demarcation, the size of the investment and the amount available, and the priorities of the Commission, because the Commission is more interested to see, we can tell this open, to see sustainable action with the green component, for example, better the environmental sector than the transport sector, things it must be admitted. And therefore, some larger investments should go out of the bilateral programs. We can go back to this also in the following. So let me see the other two, because there are several questions. One question is that is referring to the fact that under Ripatum, for the revenue generating projects, for example, in the railway infrastructure, there was a calculation of the net present value to determine the amount of the IPA grant according to the so-called financing gap. And the question is, what would be the difference in case of blending? In general terms, I don't see a big difference, because the definition of the amount of IPA grant must be always based on some financial gaps. So it is necessary to calculate the financial gap, but also one difference could be that about the additionality, because you have very well pointed out this. There could be some suggestions in the design of the project to include some components that would maybe have not necessarily be included in the initial project. I want to give an example, because I had this example in two projects, one in the energy sector and another for a project of broadband infrastructure, when two different financial institutions discussed about the project design, because based on the public consultations, there were some demands to provide in one case was the transmission lines, and in the other, the cables, as underground infrastructure. This demand created additional financial costs for these projects that were accommodated, and of course they also changed the net present value that had been calculated at the initially for that project. And the reason for this is that additionality is also exactly to address some priorities that can be environmental priorities, and in environmental priorities also to preserve the landscape is not only the pollution. So in these cases, in the cases of this project, this was done. So there could be a difference, but the principle, to answer to Burjo, the principle is the same. But the additionality could bring some elements in the technical design of these projects to better comply with the EU policy priorities. The last question, I hope to have answered all the questions, because for some technical reason, the questions and answers were scrolling up and down, but if I forgot somebody, we may get back to this, and we still, of course, have limited time. Are we going to calculate the amount of credits through cost-benefit analysis? This is, in fact, This question is again referred to some of the other questions that were discussed about the determination of the amount of an investment grant or the amount of a credit. Why this? Because for those who are not familiar with cost-benefit analysis, it is always, mentioned cost-benefit analysis, but some of you have never studied a cost-benefit analysis or prepared it or reviewed it. The cost-benefit analysis is a presentation of financial analysis and economic analysis. And this is why it's called the cost-benefit, because there is a cost of an investment, and then there are the benefits. Now I'm speaking in very general terms, not for specialists of the cost-benefit analysis, but in general terms, there are benefits that are monetary benefits that can be quantified in money. So we can say cost, revenues, and then non-monetary benefits. We said that the benefits are the element justifying the investment. If there are not these benefits, if the project is non-economically feasible, it should not be carried out under these operations, and we can forget it. But assuming that the project is economically feasible, then we look at the financial part. And yes, indeed, the calculation of the loan, the credit part, must be based on a thorough estimate of the financials. And I would like to conclude on this part one important element that is about the risk. And the risk, one of the risks, there are several risks, institutional, technical, financial, etc. And there are two risks that are to be analyzed, probably in this period, even three risks. Because the first risk is the accuracy of the cost estimates. In this period where all the costs have raised, and in some sectors, really the trend and the forecast of the cost of raw materials is a very difficult exercise. When we make the financial analysis for a project which has time horizon of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in the energy sector, for example, the accuracy of the cost estimates cannot be so realistic in some cases, because on the one side, the cost of the raw materials is subject in this period to high variability, but also there is a very high inflationary tensions, not only in Turkey. In Turkey, this is really exceptional in negative terms currently, but of course, it should normalize over time. But it is true that the inflation is back to the picture, also in EU member states and all over the world, after almost 20 years that we didn't see inflation in our countries. So there is one risk that is about the cost estimates. But another element is also about the revenue estimates. I have worked at the feasibility study in Croatia, where it was for hydropower, an hydropower plant system. And we used some forecast for the revenues until the year 2050. And these estimates, they were taken from official sources, including not only the European Union. However, the investment company, which is the investment HEP, is the investment company of energy in Croatia, they didn't believe these estimates, and they were saying that no, these revenues are too high, are too high level, the price of energy will never arrive at that level. And therefore, there is a very big financial risk that if we take a loan, we will not cover our investment costs. The history has demonstrated a few years later that they were totally wrong, because these estimates on the price of energy were largely surpassed by the reality, and now the price of energy is much higher, and that project they have done entirely as it was envisaged, they would have now larger profits, but they decided instead of making the chain of hydropowers to make only one hydropower, and that one is going to be extremely profitable. So yes, the cost-benefit analysis can be done. In some cases, for some projects, it could be also simplified cost-benefit analysis or other methodologies depending on the project. For example, in the social sector, the methodologies are different than cost-benefit analysis. And of course, if there will be demand from those sectors, we can expand this in the sectoral focus groups. So
Valeria,
I think.
Sorry, can I have a sentence, please?
Yes, sorry. And then because we are in the phase of the wrap up, so please.
The biggest problem is that in all the whole legislative package for IPA 3, there is no mention of CBA requirement. Plus, in the current perspective, it's not even called CBA. It's called, I can project the document, Economic Appraisal Vademecum. If I can share it.
Yeah, this is what exactly I mentioned. That would be cost benefit or something else.
It's the language is changing, but in principle, it's all about the same. The problem is that it's not sitting in any framework agreement proposal or financial agreement proposal. So yes, I mean, we are very curious to understand how the Commission would treat those projects on case-by-case basis. Perhaps share the screen. I would try to share the screen. Yes, share.
Yes.
So this is the
quickly, so that way. Yes. I know this.
This is the
document. This manual. Yes. This is a manual which has replaced the cost-benefit analysis manual of 2014. But there is nothing new in it, because the real difference that is not treated in this manual, unfortunately, would be a difference in methodologies for the projects in the social sector, because you don't treat in the same way the cost-benefit analysis of a hospital, of a school. So it's a different methodology that unfortunately is not presented in the manual that you have shown. But you are right, there is not for the IPA, maybe just to clarify what you have shown in one word, also as a wrap-up. For the European Union member states, there are some methodologies that are published by the Commission through even regulations, not only guidance or guidelines, that are mandatory for the presentation of investment. Under IPA, just to remain in what most of the participants are familiar, in this programming cycle, 2021-2027, the major projects are back, if I can express this in this way. So there will be, or there should be, major projects under the operational programs. However, the guidelines and methodologies are not yet available, so they could mirror the methodologies and guidelines that are for EU member states, and generally I assume will be like this. However, when we refer to blending operations, let's not forget that we may have a blended operation which has 30% grant, 70% loan. This is just to simplify, but for all the participants to be clear. In that case, it is clear that the methodology of appraisal of that investment is also led by the international financial institutions. Now, all the international financial institutions, and to mention the largest, the multilateral, like, you know, the World Bank, EBRD, and our European Investment Bank, their methodologies are all similar. I would not stick to one guideline to the other, but there are some important unknown that must be clarified before starting. And these are, if I may say, two parameters, 2 or 3, but they are absolutely important, are these. First of all, depending on the sector, there is a time horizon to be considered. So if you say, I have a project in the energy sector, should I project my costs and revenues for 20 years, for 30 years? Because depending on this time horizon, the financial result is different. So it is important that there is a standardization and there is a clear reference how to assume the time horizon for the main sectors, because this in the European Union is given. We have a table. If the project is this, you take this time horizon. And if it, you know, and you know, because even in the commercial projects of companies, rarely you exceed the 9 or 10 years. This is the maximum. For some projects, the time horizon, the private investment in the industry is 5 years, is 10 years. It is rare to have commercial projects with 30 years, but in the road, in the energy, in the broadband, there is a longer time horizon. So this is one parameter. The other, because we had a question from the Minister of Transport mentioning the net present value, to calculate how much $1 that you can cash in 20 years time, in 2042, you make a projection of a revenue of the money that you will cash in 2042, in 20 years. How much is the value today of that revenue? Then what happens is that for calculating this, one must use one parameter, that is the financial discount rate. Now imagine that there are 4 projects in the road sector, and one uses a financial discount rate, another uses another, etc. This is not possible. So in the European Union, this is given. It is not the same for all countries, because not the various member states, they don't have the same financial structure and internal financial market. But what is important is, more than by using one guideline or another, that the conditions, the parameters to make these financial studies, cost-benefit analysis, etc., are clarified from the very beginning. So we have to hopefully expect that the guidelines of the Commission on and the criteria for assessment or whatever guideline clarify these aspects, or the beneficiary country will have to clarify them. This is a very important aspect. I hope we can get back on this, especially in the sectoral focus groups, but also probably also tomorrow. I propose that to stick to the agenda, we have 5 minutes to make our wrap up. And I hope that this wide contents of information will be absorbed overnight, so that we can prepare for tomorrow, where we will have more explanation on the Efsd plus guarantee and practical insights with some mini case studies and good practice examples, both on blending and on guarantees and budgetary guarantees. So today, what we have seen from the start that there are investment needs that are much higher than the grant funds actually available. And this is also for IPA, is also in whatever context, but then the Commission not having the possibility to increase further the budget because there are budget constraints, as you may imagine, then it is devoting part of the resources to blending facilities and platform and to budgetary guarantees instruments. And these instruments are all available under the newly created Turkish investment platform. We said the Turkish investment platform is not a fund, is a mechanism, but there are funds backing this facility. And the importance to access it is exactly to exploit the leverage effect for all these projects where this is possible and feasible and recommendable. So I think the importance of to spend the time today and tomorrow is to understand more how to exploit these opportunities in which cases, in each sector, for which type of projects, and then practically, concretely, how to access these instruments or try to access. Of course, with the due support also by the European Commission and the financial institutions.
Valeria, if you allow me to compliment just with one comment.
Please.
A minute. I think from the presentation, and thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview, and from the excellent questions that followed, very clearly, I think it is understood well also by everybody in the audience that it is an evolving landscape. Blending started in 2008, I believe, so there is already many years of experience in blending, and it evolved to include various instruments, remunerated, non-remunerated. However, currently with the innovation, which is the budgetary guarantees, what falls under blending is changing. And that is what Valeria also was highlighting, the need to prioritize and the need to use the opportunity coming from new financial instruments and the budgetary guarantees specifically, so that these limited resources can be actually mobilized and expanded and also leveraged more. So there were operations under blending that were supported under blending, which in the future would be supported under budgetary guarantees. And that is quite important to understand. And secondly, it is also important to understand that blending is not, there could be sovereign lending without blending. Blending is not necessary in all cases. So what are these really specific cases that would require additional EU grant to be blended, or technical assistance to be blended, or risk capital to be provided? It is really these specific situations that are subject to this principle of additionality. I just wanted to mention that tomorrow we will give some examples of budgetary guarantees in areas that previously could easily fall under blending. And there are some examples also from Turkey where grants are blended with loans, but in the future, budgetary guarantees could be used much more strategically, so to save the grant resource for something else. This is very direct response to one of the participants that asked, can these grants be really, are they redirected? No, actually it means that they can be used for things that really require grants and for things that can be mobilized, can be financed through other means. These new instruments allow this, and I hope tomorrow we can have another discussion around blending and budgetary guarantees and what is more appropriate for what. That would be the final session, just to hope participants come back for it, because this will not be the end today.
Thank you. Thank you. So, it is all for today.
Ben de çok teşekkür ediyorum. Hem teknik destek ekibimize, Valeri, Magdalena ve Tomaş'a katılımlarınız için de çok teşekkür ediyorum. Yarın yine saat 9.30'da online olarak toplanmak dileğiyle oturumumuzu kapatıyorum. Soru cevaba baktım. Zannediyorum ilave bir şey de bu arada gelmedi. Katılımlarınız için teşekkürler. Kapatıyorum eğitim programımızı.
See you all. Good luck and all the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much to all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.